Hello Year 10! It's been so long since we've seen each other and I'm really missing our lessons. I hope you're all safe and well, and I want to say a big thank you and a huge well done to those of you that have been working really hard and have been trying your very best to stay in touch with me. I know how difficult it is to do that, so if you've not managed to check in for the past couple of weeks, please do just send me an email to let me know you're all right. Let me know how you're getting on, and if there's anything I can do at all to help you, please do let me know, because I can't help you unless you let me know. Okay, so today we will be looking at exposure. I'm going to talk you through those questions that I set you last week. You probably found this poem a little bit trickier than the others, and I would expect that. Okay, I think it's quite a tricky poem. So if you struggled, please don't worry. Stay tuned, and hopefully the next 20 minutes will help you make a bit more sense of what's going on. So take care, guys. I hope, fingers crossed, I get to see some of you face to face really soon. Okay, stay tuned. Then folks, so as with the last couple of poems, the first thing I did was I made some of the more unusual words in the poem bold, as you can see, okay, and I gave you their definitions here. So let's just run through these really quickly. To be half asleep, dozing, is drowse. So think of the word drowsy. Drowse means to be half asleep. Sentries are soldiers that are on guard. Incessantly means that something is happening constantly without interruption. Salient. Now this one might have tripped you up because there's multiple meanings of this word, but within the context of this poem, salient is a name given to a piece of land in the line of attack. So if you imagine the front line in a war situation, a salient is a piece of land that is on that front line. Okay, so it marks sort of like the line of danger, if you like. Nonchalance is expressing disinterest, coolness, or a lack of care. If something creates a sense of sadness or regret, you could say that was poignant. It's an excellent word, poignant. Glozed is an old-fashioned word that means the same as glazed, to glaze something or to cover it. And merciless means showing no mercy. So make sure you've got all those filled in correctly, give them a tick, and then we will move over to the questions. Just before we start the questions, please make sure that you read my little introductions really carefully, because in there I've tried to include some of the most important pieces of context for you. So what's really important to understand with this poem is that Wilfred Owen is a war poet. Okay, he is somebody who actually served in the army during World War I, and he wrote most of his poems between 1917 and 18. So all of these poems that he wrote were actually created in quite a short space of time. This poem is sort of highlighting and drawing on his experience in the trenches, particularly during the winter of 1917, a very bitter, a very harsh winter. And it's a poem all about passive suffering. Now, what I mean by that, passive suffering, passive means to not act. It's about inaction. So the people, the soldiers in this poem are suffering because of a lack of action. And it's not necessarily their fault, okay, but they are suffering because of the passive nature of their existence. They're waiting for something, anything to happen. So it could be that they're waiting for it to be called to attack. It could be that they're waiting to be attacked. They're waiting for the storm to pass. They're just waiting for something, anything to happen. Okay, it's very brutal, this poem. It's about the horror of war, not through how we would normally expect to hear about the horror of war. It's not about the horror of action. It's about the horror of inaction, not of fighting, but waiting to do something. Okay, it's really, really famous, this poem, so some of you might have recognised it or seen parts of it before. What I think is really poignant, there's that word, is that Owen himself was killed 1 week before the Armistice Treaty was signed. Okay, so he didn't survive the war, and his success, his international fame came after the war, after his death. Owen poems are often used on Remembrance Day, okay, and I think actually some TV programmes use some of his poems in the VE Day celebrations, even though that was about World War II. But you know that Wilfred Owen is from World War I. There are lots and lots of really interesting and really useful video clips about Wilfred Owen that will help you understand this context. So I will email those to you tomorrow. So please make sure you check your emails tomorrow, and I will send you a couple of clips to watch. So let's head over to the main poem now. I'm going to be talking through these 12 questions that I set you to look through the poem. We might talk about some in more depth than others, but we will try and make sure we cover all of the different elements that were in these questions. So bear with me while I change over my sheets. Come on, visualizer, there we go. Okay, so the first question, I asked you to go through and highlight all the times where Owen uses personification when he's describing the weather, all the times he makes the weather sound like a human or having human thoughts or emotions. There are tons in this poem, so I'm not going to go through them all, but I'm going to pick out which one I think, to me, stands out the strongest. You might disagree, and that's absolutely fine, but the one that I always remember is this one right in the first line. The iced east winds that knive us. Now, knife is a verb created from the noun knife, so it means to stab. Okay, so it's like they're being continuously, repetitively stabbed by these winds. Now, the reason I think this stands out so much is it really highlights and emphasises the viciousness of the wind, and it also emphasises the pain of the wind. You know, if you've ever been, particularly if you've been to the seaside on a really cold day, when the wind is really blasting you in the face and you get that stinging sensation, that sharp stinging. Okay, and Owen here uses that personification, the kniving, okay, to highlight the pain of the wind. And what it also does is it positions, from the very start, it positions the nature or the weather as an enemy. These men aren't just in a war against the other side, against the other troops. They are in a war with nature. They are vulnerable to attack from the other troops and also nature itself. So the reason why Owen puts that right at the start is to show us right from the beginning that this is a poem where he's showing us that nature is an enemy to these men. Okay, so question 2. Why do the soldiers keep awake even though they are wearied? So let me just find that bit. Here we are. Wearied we keep awake because the night is silent. Now, if you really think about this line, what Owen is saying here is we stay awake because it's quiet. Now think about why that might be. Why would it being quiet keep you awake at night? Because ordinarily, I don't know about you, I need it to be dead silent to go to sleep. So I'm just going to pause for a few seconds and let you think about that. What is going on here? Why are they staying awake? Because it's quiet. To me, this is all about the threat of silence. Okay, it's almost like these men are waiting for something to fill the silence. And considering the circumstance, the situation that they're in, that thing that fills the silence is not really going to be a positive, is it? It's either going to be a charge, a call for attack, or being attacked, or something that signals, that heralds something bad happening. Okay, so we've got that twisted idea of silence meaning something sinister, something threatening. Okay, they're awake, they can't sleep even though they're tired because they're frightened, they're terrified of what's going to happen. Question 3. In the second stanza, the speaker describes the noise of the guns in the distance like a rumour of a war. What does this imply about the feelings of the speaker at the moment? Right, so if you think about what a rumour is like a whispering, isn't it? It might be true, it might not be true. So what is Owen doing here? If he's saying there's this rumour of another war. To me, it suggests that they have been waiting for so long for something to happen that it's almost like this idea of being in a war zone is starting to disintegrate slightly. They are so consumed by inaction by not doing anything, that the idea of being in a war feels like a whispering rumour. The sounds that they hear in the distance, they can hear action in the distance, but they've not experienced it themselves. So for them, the war is nothing but a rumour at that moment. Okay, and if you see that line that follows, what are we doing here, that rhetorical question highlights that questioning, doesn't it? What's the point in being here? It highlights the futility of what these men are doing. For them, they can't see a purpose for being there because they're not in action. They are just waiting. Okay. Question 4. In stanza 3, dawn arrives. What are the usual connotations of dawn? So, here's dawn arriving. Things you might have put down for the connotations of war. Well, for me, dawn is about beginning, something new starting. If you think of the imagery of a rising sun often is seen as very hopeful. Okay, but here in this poem, moving on now to question 5, here the dawn is not hopeful. Okay, those usual connotations have been replaced by something else. It brings a poignant misery. So it brings this sense of sadness, regret, dawning over these people, these men waiting in these trenches. It's not a sign of hope or an image of positivity. It's that feeling of, oh goodness, here we go again. We've got another day to try and survive, another day to endure. Okay, all they know is that this war is lasting. They are soaked in rain, and all they can see is the dark, the stormy clouds that are almost sagging with water because they've got so much rain in them. Okay, so this dawn is not positive. It's not about new hope. It's not about new beginnings. It's that feeling of, oh my goodness, how are we going to do this again? Okay, it's about this constant pain of inaction, of nothing happening. And it's about enduring that fear or that terror of just sitting there waiting for something to happen. Okay. Number 6. Speak the first line of stanza 4 out 3 times. So stanza 4, I'm not going to read it to you 3 times, but I asked you to go through and find all the s noises. So, sudden, successive flights of bullets streak the silence, less deadly that shudders back with snow, sidelong flakes. So, once you've done that, you'll notice, if you look at how these S sounds are distributed, they're very heavy in these first couple of lines. I'm just going to read them to you again. Sudden successive flights of bullets streak the silence, less deadly than the air that shudders black with snow. So that use of that repeated S sound is called sibilance. Hopefully you remembered that. Why might you have used this technique here? Well, think about it. Think about what's being described. Successive flights of bullets streak the silence. So suddenly we move from nothing happening to we have this noise of bullets being fired across no man's land, if you like, across the gulf between their side and the enemy's side. And Owen says that the bullets are less deadly than the air that shudders black with snow. So even though bullets are being fired, they are less threatening, less deadly than the weather that is falling upon them. Owen is saying the air that is black with snow, so it's snowing so heavy that you can barely see anything. The air, the darkness, the cold, the snow is more deadly than the bullets. Okay, so that's what he's describing. So have a think, why does that use of sibilance work here? What does it sound like? Perhaps it sounds like more than one thing. I think it's there because it mimics the sound of the bullets and the sound of the wind. Okay, so the sound that is created by that sibilance highlights the point that Owen is making, because the S sounds make us hear the sound of the bullets, but also the sound of that wind. So by making us think about both at the same time, using sibilants, Owen is making us see the wind and in the same way that we see the bullets. Okay, does that make sense? So the sibilance is used to join those two ideas together. We hear the bullets, but it also sounds like the wind. So we understand the similarity between them. The wind and the bullets are essentially doing the same job in this section. Okay. In stanza 5, Owen says, "We cringe in holes." How does this create the impression of the men behaving like animals? So that line is here. Now, I don't know about you, but I have been cringing a lot lately, usually when I have to make these videos for you all. But to cringe is really to make yourself want to be smaller. When you physically cringe, I'm doing it now, you do it now at home. When you cringe, it's like your muscles contract and you're trying to make your body smaller, right? Because you want to disappear. So that imagery of them cringing in holes, it makes it sound like they are desperate, almost in an animalistic sense, animalistic desperation to escape or protect themselves. And what are they protecting themselves from? Look at the previous line. Pale flakes with fingering stealth come feeling for our faces. Again, we've got repeated sounds here, haven't we? Here we've got Fs. With pale flakes with fingering stealth come feeling for our faces. That noise, here that's mimicking the sound of the snow falling. Okay, and they are cringing in the holes. They are flattening themselves. They are making themselves try and sort of turn into the ground like animals to protect themselves from the danger and the threat of the snow. Okay. What number are we on? Number 10. In stanza 6, the men hallucinate and imagine their ghosts returning home. What does this tell us about their state of mind? Well, here, this stanza is a little bit different because all the previous stanzas, these are in the trenches. Okay, this is all direct description of the experience of being in the trench. So this is very physical. What happens in this stanza is Owen switches things up again a little bit, and here we have this hallucination section, and we are no longer in the trenches. Sorry, all the way down here. We're no longer in the trenches, we are now back home. So we've got a change of focus here. Sorry, my cat's going crazy outside. If you can hear the bell, just ignore him. So we've got a change of focus. This is no longer in the trenches. This is a hallucination of back home. So if the previous section was physical, what's this? Hopefully, some of you thought about psychological. This is about the psychological suffering. Okay, and they don't imagine themselves. Owen doesn't describe himself going back home. He describes his ghost dragging itself home. So Owen is almost suggesting here that his death is inevitable. The inevitability of death in this situation. And this idea of his ghost returning home, if you know anything about World War I and World War II and people who died in action, very often their bodies weren't recovered. Okay, their bodies weren't returned home. So here, Owen is sort of playing with that idea and making us think, making us imagine, showing us that in his future, he doesn't see himself returning home. He sees the ghost of himself returning home. Okay, you could also look at this in a different way, of course, because there is more than one way of looking at everything in poetry, and actually you are rewarded for talking about alternative ways of looking at things. So even if Owen does imagine himself surviving, what does that choice of word do then? If he's imagining himself surviving but describes himself as a ghost returning home, what does that suggest? Perhaps that he's lost who he is during this battle. He's lost who he is and what makes him who he is, what makes him a human being. All of that is lost in war, perhaps. Okay, so this stanza really shows the psychological impact of that passive suffering. So I'm going to write that here because I think that's really important. Okay, and these two stanzas, I think, do the same job. Both of these stanzas talk about the psychological impact of this passive suffering, the hallucination, the imagining of their future selves and what's going to happen to them in the future psychologically here. Okay. This stanza, the penultimate stanza, is very, very confusing, and lots of people think it's confusing on purpose. Okay, why might that be? Perhaps it's because it's not natural to be in this situation of war. Perhaps Owen is saying that by being in this context, by being in this scenario, nothing makes sense. Okay, it's futile, it's purposeless, and so what we understand to be real and what we understand to be reality is no longer real, and that's why this is so confusing, because war and the experience of being in war turns people upside down, inside out, psychologically. Okay, so final stanza. Oh, sorry, I asked, how do we know that men's faith in God is fading? Well, if you look at this final line, for love of God seems dying. Now, those of you that study philosophy and ethics or know anything about religion, Christianity, those sort of religious connotations, the love of God is often seen as, I've forgotten my words now. What word do I want? The love of God is seen as something that is renewing, it's saving, okay? It protects. Here, Owen is saying now the love of God seems dying. So it's like his faith, his trust in God is fading away, but also his understanding of what God is changing. God is no longer about love and protection and renewal. God is becoming something different. Okay. Final stanza. How does Owen show that the weather will defeat some of the men? So here, remember, we're hallucinating, we're back home, this is psychologically. This is another shift back to the present. This is back on the fields, back on the trenches, sorry. Tonight, the frost will, that modal verb, certainty, this frost will fasten on this mud and us. So if you think about the idea of frost fastening on the people, okay, on the soldiers are going to be frozen. They are going to be restricted. They're going to be almost held and suffocated by the frost. And Owen carries on. The frost will be shrivelling many hands and puckering foreheads crisp. So everybody is going to be exposed to this dreadful weather. The burying party, now those are literally groups of soldiers whose job it was to go around and bury the bodies of people who had died. The burying party picks and shovels in shaking grasp. Picks are like, oh God, here we go, to draw you a picture now. A pick is like a big metal pointy curved thing like that, and you use it to hit the ground to dig up very hard compacted earth. So the burying party will go out with their picks and shovels in shaking hands, pausing over half-known faces. Who do you think these faces belong to? Yeah, these are the people who have died. Interestingly, we don't know if they've died in battle or because of the weather, and he does that on purpose. Okay, so the burying party will go out ready to bury the bodies in this freezing weather. They'll stop and look over these faces that are half known. Okay, that phrase. So this experience makes them no longer look like themselves. They've seen and experienced and endured such terrible things that we can't even recognise them anymore. They're only half known. All their eyes are ice. Okay, so these people that are being described here have succumbed to the weather. What technique is being used there? All their eyes are ice. It's a metaphor. So it's Owen suggesting here that their faces, their lives, have been literally frozen in time. Frozen solid. Okay. So, look how many annotations we got just out of those questions. There's a couple of things I just want to pick up on that you probably noticed when you were going through this poem and you perhaps found interesting, or you perhaps thought that must look important. I know some people did, because some people emailed me about it. What I would advise you to do, if you didn't notice this first time round, look at the final line of each stanza. Okay, we have this repeated use of this final line, but nothing happens, but nothing happens, but nothing happens, but nothing happens. Now here, what Owen is doing is he is emphasising this idea of passivity, of just waiting to be attacked, to be killed, to die, but nothing happens. You could also argue that here Owen is perhaps drawing on or commenting on people's reaction to what is happening. Okay, nothing is happening. Nobody is doing anything to try and help them, to try and save them. They are alone. Nothing happens. It goes round and round and round, and they have to endure it for weeks, months on end. Okay, so that use of repetition makes this process seem like a cycle. We had that reference to dawn, the cycle of day and night, of time passing, and by constantly repeating this, but nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens, we get this cyclical sense of passivity. Okay, so the repetition of that line creates that cyclical sense of passivity. Okay, when we don't have but nothing happens, we have the rhetorical questions. What are we doing here? Is it that we are dying? Okay, and Owen does that to highlight to us how senseless this all seems to him. And, you know, he is one of millions, remember. The futility of what they are doing. What are they actually doing? Why are we here? Are we dying? Are we not dying? What are we waiting for? Okay, that sense of uncertainty is really powerful in this poem. So hopefully, and I must emphasise, this is a very quick overview of this poem. You will have noticed as you're going through it, there is tons and tons in here that we can unpick. And we will look at this again together when we are back together face to face, hopefully. But for now, hopefully, that gives you a more confident sense of what's happening in this poem. Okay, the majority of it is a present description of being in the trenches, of waiting for something, anything to happen. It's very physical. And then we get about 2/3 of the way down, we get this switch from the physical pain, the physical uncertainty, to the psychological pain and suffering and uncertainty. And then Owen moves us back to the front line, to the trenches, and really shows us the reality of what it's like to be here. Okay, to be at war, not with the enemy, but also weather itself and nature itself. So hopefully you found that useful. I am going to email you a couple more videos and a couple more clips that will add to your understanding of this poem. Well done for sticking with me. I will continue to email you all directly and let you know when new things have been added to OneNote. Remember, if you need anything at all, please do just let me know. But for now, take care, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye.